Steve, and this is Tim, and this is another... Let me get my articles in order first, folks. Hi, I'm Steve, and this is Tim, and this is another Erif Media News Update, brought to you by erifmedia.com. Not sure why I introduced him. I kind of feel like a control freak now. Maybe he can introduce himself. Hi, I'm Steve.
I'm Tim.
This is another Erif Media News Update, brought to you by erifmedia.com. Our first article today is concerning an issue that we're going to start hearing a lot about in the media. I guess to be fair, we already are, if you're paying attention. This posted by thinkprogress.org. Now is the time for a carbon tax, IMF chief says. The head of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, called for a carbon tax at the IMF World Bank annual meeting in Lima, Peru. Reports show that more and more places are adopting carbon taxes in largely successful efforts to use market forces to increase clean energy development. Climate change is now a macro-critical issue, IMF Director Christine Lagarde said. And let's not forget that the Pope was calling for carbon taxes as a method to combat climate change. So I'm pretty sure that means God, him or herself, is also an advocate for carbon taxes. Wow. And to exemplify how this will manifest here in Canada, or how it already is manifesting, this is an article out of the Canadian Press, putting a price on gridlock needed to complement better roads and transit. It is long past time that Canada's congested cities began putting a price on some of their most precious real estate, says a new report from Canada's Ecofiscal Commission. We've got a very scarce commodity called road space during peak times, and it's unpriced. Road and bridge tolls date back to at least Roman times, but have been largely rejected in Canada despite widespread application internationally. We should, of course, make more decisions based on what they did in Roman times here in Canada. But to sum it up, and even though these two things might seem unrelated, they are in fact. The government wants to start charging you more for things like driving, and eventually taxing you on just about everything you do. So, something to look forward to. What do you think about that, Tim?
We already pay for infrastructure, Steve. It's called taxes.
Yeah, and the government wants you to pay more taxes.
CBC News. Ontario sees hydro rate jumps again. Next hike comes in 2 months, pushing rates up another 10%. Electricity prices in Ontario officially increased, and the rate hike expected to push up the average household hydro bill by 3.4%. Electricity has jumped 77% since smart meters became common 5 years ago.
Not so smart, are they? 77% in 5 years, that seems about right, eh?
I really have a problem with this personally. I just think it's outrageous that we're paying so much for hydro. And now the sale of Hydro One and the CEO of Hydro One making $4 million a year annual salary. And we're still paying off the hydro debt that they incurred 2 and 3 decades ago.
As you can tell, Tim is an Ontario hydro user. Well, Tim, if you don't like what's going on here in Ontario, perhaps you can take it up with these people. This is an article posted by Infowars.com. Global Supreme Court will be ushered in this month by UN Climate Summit. This month, November 30th to December 11th, a UN climate conference will attempt to do what they failed to do 6 years ago in Copenhagen. Establish a global regime complete with global court, global taxes, and a global enforcement mechanism. All hail the New World Order. And one system they'll use to enslave us? I don't know what the right word is there. Anyway, this is an article from the Economic Collapse blog. The UN plans to implement universal biometric identification for all of humanity by 2030. Yay. The United Nations is already working hard towards the implementation of this goal, particularly among refugee populations. The UN has partnered with Accenture to implement a biometric identification system that reports information back to a central database in Geneva. Information like where you are, what you're doing, and who you're with. You know, Tim, global Supreme Courts, mandatory biometric identification cards, the future's starting to look like a bad sci-fi movie.
I don't have a problem with it as long as they have a system that is secure.
Yes, I'm sure the system will be secure for the fascists running it.
Oh, on the subject of potential danger, this from endofamericadream.com. One of the most dangerous volcanoes in North America is roaring to life. Popo, as it's called by the locals, Popo, as it is called by the locals, has come back to life. This, a giant volcano that sits approximately 50 miles away from the Mexican city's 18 million residents. Many wonder if a major eruption may be imminent. Overall, 25 million people live in the immediate vicinity. I think I'd be moving.
Well, there's a lot of volcanoes that are just waiting to erupt. Speaking of places that Tim doesn't want to live, this is from Almazder News. Sure I said that wrong. .com. US-backed moderate rebels put Alawite women in cages to protect themselves from airstrikes. In order to deter Syrian and Russian air forces inside the East Ghouta region of rural Damascus, the Army of Islam and the Free Syrian Army have placed kidnapped Alawite women in cages to protect themselves from airstrikes. That is absolutely barbaric. Anyone who could do that needs to be thrown into a volcano, in my opinion.
Now closer to home, this from the CBC News. Forget Syria. Russia's muscle is moving closer to Canada's doorstep. Putin's military buildup in Arctic Pacific could set new Canadian defense priorities. Russia is not Canada's only concern, but Russia is special. Canada was reportedly even seen in Moscow as the most anti-Russian nation on Earth.
You know, in Canadians' defense, especially Canadians of my generation, we were literally raised on anti-Russian propaganda from every angle of the media. I mean, Russians were always the bad guy. That is, of course, until the Arab terrorists came along. Ridiculous. Anyway, in some light-hearted Canadian news, this from the Canadian Press, cheeky petition calls for Harper to be renamed Calgary International Airport. An online petition hopes to give wings to the idea of changing Stephen Harper's name to Calgary International Airport. While other online petitions debate whether the airport should be renamed after the outgoing Prime Minister, the latest entry proposes the opposite, saying it would help Harper rehabilitate his image following a disastrous campaign. Well, that's just stupid. What do you think about that, Tim?
I could care less, Steve.
Well, speaking of ridiculous reporting, and I wanted to point out this article for just that reason. This out of the LondonFreePress.com, and this involves a young man who committed suicide in jail. Key factors and suicide unchanged. More than a year after a man hanged himself with a strip of blanket tied to a cell door, the same blankets are being used in the jail, a coroner's inquest learned Tuesday. And no modifications have been made to the cell doors either. Blame the cell door. Blame the blanket he hanged himself with. Don't blame the system or perhaps the factors that led to his suicide. It's kind of like the warning on a plastic bag that reminds you that it's not a suitable toy for children, or on your cell phone battery, how it reminds you not to swallow it because some idiot did. God. You got any good news for us, Tim?
I've got some chilling news here for you. This from RT.com. Antarctica gaining more ice than losing. Antarctica has been accumulating more ice than it's been losing in recent decades. A new study by NASA has revealed challenging existing theories on climate change and rises in sea level.
You know, with all this talk of climate change, Tim, it makes me wonder, what happened to global warming? I thought global warming was destroying the universe.
I don't know, Steve. I'm not a doctor. But I do know that sometimes the climate changes.
And we should be afraid. Very afraid. Well, in more chilling news, don't like that drone overhead? Grab an anti-drone freeze ray. Anti-drone freeze ray, developed by a group of UK companies. How does it work? Well, you'll have to read the article yourself, but let's just say that it's very complicated, I'm sure, and it involves radio waves. Speaking of drones, over to Tim.
From Canada Press. Moose Jaw police officer in hot water over tweet about female prisoner. His tweet read, adult female prisoner asked officer to pass around a hat today to help her with bail money. The tweet also included the hashtags, short of the goal, she's still here, and we don't wear hats.
Hashtag, you gotta hand it to her for trying. Alright, our last article today is another interesting piece of Canadian media. This out of ctvnews.ca. Ontario, Alberta police warn parents about potentially tampered with candy. Police departments in both Ontario and Alberta are warning parents and children to be vigilant after receiving numerous reports of Halloween candy that was allegedly tampered with. The Niagara Regional Police issued a warning on November 1st after local parents reported finding a metal blade in candy given out. Then, on November 2nd, police say they attended a second residence in the Niagara region where another razor blade was found in an O'Henry chocolate bar. I don't know if these are legitimate happenings or this is the media sensationalizing reports, as they like to do. And I'm sure now we should all be afraid of Halloween, we should be afraid of Halloween candy, we should probably even cancel Halloween next year, especially since the EPA has come out and said that pumpkins are causing climate change. But it boggles my mind that there could be people with such depravity, such evil in their hearts that they would tamper with children's Halloween candy. That to me is a huge sign of the decline of humanity. And if you are the type of person who perhaps would do that, put some dangerous foreign object into anything you're going to give to a kid, you need to be thrown into a volcano. So, there's that. Anyway, that's all the news we've got for you today. Thank you for joining us on Erif Media News Update. Please check out the website, erifmedia.com. There's not much there yet because we're still pretty new, but there will be, so, just keep checking it out. Over to you, Tim.
Goodbye.